We all think we know the story of the Titanic, right? The giant iceberg, the desperate scramble for lifeboats, the band heroically playing on. But what if I told you that some of the most famous parts of that story, well, they aren't exactly true? Today, we're going to deconstruct one of history's greatest disasters by going straight to the source, the original testimony, the actual records. It's time to separate the legend from the reality. So let's go back to April 10th, 1912. The RMS Titanic set sail. I mean, just look at this thing. It was the largest ship on the planet, an absolute marvel of technology and luxury. It wasn't just a way to get from point A to point B, it was a floating palace, a statement, a testament to human ingenuity at the dawn of a new century. And at the very heart of the Titanic story is this one single idea, this feeling of almost unbelievable confidence, the idea that this ship was invincible. You heard it everywhere, the press, the public. It was this feeling that we had finally conquered the ocean. This phrase, it really became the epitaph for an entire era of thinking. Okay, but here's the first major twist. That whole legend of the unsinkable ship, it wasn't really a huge deal before the disaster. It became this massive, powerful story in the aftermath. Why? Because it gave a terrible, random event a moral. Pride comes before a fall. It's a much better story that way, and the Titanic became the ultimate symbol of that lesson. Now, that's not to say that the people on board didn't feel perfectly safe. They absolutely did. During the U.S. Senate inquiry after the sinking, they asked a seaman, a Mr. Taylor, if the crew really thought the ship was unsinkable. And his answer was so simple and so telling, he just said, "So they thought." That was the feeling. They were on this incredible modern marvel, and they felt safe. So now, let's go to the event itself. And to really understand what happened that night, we're not going to guess. We're going to listen to the people who were actually there. We're turning to the official transcripts from the 1912 Senate inquiry. These are their words, raw and completely unfiltered. First, let's just look at the timeline, because it is brutally fast. At 11:40 p.m., the iceberg is spotted. Less than 3 hours later, at 2:20 a.m., the largest moving object ever built by man is gone. The sheer speed of it all is just shocking. It created this scene of total chaos that unfolded in less time than it takes to watch a movie. And in that chaos, you get these moments that were debated for 100 years. This is the testimony from J. Bruce Ismay. He was the chairman of the company that owned the Titanic. He's describing how he got a spot in a lifeboat. It's a decision that would haunt his reputation for the rest of his life. And then you have this, a completely different view. This is Third Officer Herbert Pittman, watching from the safety of a lifeboat. He describes this horrifying, violent end. He sees the stern rise way up into the sky, and then he hears explosions as the ship literally tears itself apart from the inside. And just to show you how chaotic it was, here's another account. This is from Second Officer Charles Lighthuller, who survived by clinging to an overturned boat. He saw things from a totally different angle. His memory paints this picture of a methodical, terrifying slide into the ocean. It just goes to show you, no two people saw the same thing that night. So in the immediate aftermath, survivors are arriving in New York, and the world is in shock. The U.S. Senate moved incredibly fast. Just days after the sinking, they launched a full-blown inquiry. They were absolutely determined to figure out how something like this could have possibly happened. And this wasn't just about pointing fingers. The committee chairman, Senator William Alden Smith, he made it really clear. He said, "Our only goal here is to get the facts so we can make sure this never, ever happens again." And this is why they were so urgent. This number, 1,517. Out of about 2,223 people on board, that's how many didn't make it. It's a scale of tragedy that's almost impossible to comprehend, and a number that just demanded answers. So what was the fatal flaw? Well, a huge part of that unsinkable claim came down to its 16 watertight compartments. The idea was brilliant. The ship could stay afloat even if 2, 3, or maybe even 4 of them flooded. But the iceberg didn't just punch a hole. It sliced a long gash, like a can opener, flooding 5 compartments. And 5 was the magic number that doomed the ship. But here's maybe the most shocking failure they found. Get this. The Titanic actually had more lifeboats than the law required. The problem was, the law itself was dangerously out of date. It was designed for ships a fraction of the Titanic's size. So even by following the rules, there was no way there were enough boats for everyone. That one fact sealed the fate of hundreds of people. All right, so let's fast forward. How did this historical event become the global myth that we all know today? Well, for most of us, our image of the Titanic is inseparable from its most famous retelling, James Cameron's 1997 blockbuster. So the big question is, how does the movie compare to the history? Well, what's fascinating is that the movie's depiction of the ship is famously incredibly accurate. The attention to detail is just mind-blowing. But the portrayal of the crew, that's a very different story. Key officers are often shown as either incompetent or cowardly, but the historical record tells us the reality was pretty much the exact opposite. The truth is, most of the crew, the engineers who stayed below to keep the lights on, the stewards who guided passengers, they all went down with the ship. In their hometowns, they are hailed as heroes. There are memorials, statues, even school prizes named in their honor. Their sacrifice is a huge part of the real story, a truth that sometimes gets lost in the fiction. For decades, the Titanic was just a ghost story, a memory resting somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic. But the search for the actual physical wreck, well, that opened a whole new chapter in its legacy. And you have to imagine what a challenge this was. We're talking about a search area the size of a small country, in treacherous weather, looking for a wreck lying more than 2 miles under the surface, in complete and total darkness. It was a true needle in a haystack. Then, on September 1st, 1985, after years of trying, it happened. A team led by Dr. Robert Ballard saw an image pop up on their screen from an unmanned sub. It was one of the Titanic's boilers. They'd found it. And the discovery immediately answered a huge question. The wreck confirmed this ship had broken in two, just as some of the survivors had insisted all along. Finding the wreck was a game changer. It transformed the Titanic from this historical legend into a tangible, physical place. It became an underwater archaeological site, which totally reignited public fascination and let scientists explore the disaster in a way nobody ever thought possible. So all of this brings us back to that one big question. Why? Why are we, over a century later, still so completely captivated by this one shipwreck? I think it's because it's a story about everything. Technology and failure, heroism and hubris, class structure literally breaking apart in the icy Atlantic. As a historian Richard Howells puts it, the story has really gone beyond simple history. It's become a modern myth. It's a narrative that we keep retelling to explore our own fears and our own beliefs about the world we live in. And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway here. The sinking of the Titanic was a horrific, random disaster, but by turning it into a myth, a story with heroes and villains and a moral, we give it meaning. So it leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Why do we need these stories, these myths, to make sense of the often chaotic and random events of history?